I think that there will be an apology for what happened in Rwanda, the most Catholic country in Africa, one of the most Catholic countries in the world, where priests and nuns and bishops are on trial for inciting from their pulpits and on the church's radio stations and newspapers the massacre of their brothers and sisters. And the papacy was silent on this appalling occasion, and everyone in Rwanda knows it. And there hasn't yet been a properly written apology for that disgrace. Staying in Africa, I think it will one day be admitted with shame that it might have been in error to say that AIDS is bad as a disease, very bad, but not quite as bad as condoms are bad, or not as immoral in the same way. I say it in the presence of His grace, and I say it to His face. The preachings of His church are responsible for the death and suffering and misery of millions of His brother and sister Africans, and He should apologize for it. He should show some shame. Fourth, for condemning my friend Stephen Fry for his nature, for saying you couldn't be a member of our church. You're born in sin. There's a revolting piece of casuistry that's sometimes offered on this point. Yeah, we hate the sin only. We love the sinner. Stephen is, I'm sorry to say, not quite like other girls. It's his nature. Actually, he is like other girls in that he's, when I last checked, absolutely boy mad. He's not being condemned for what he does, he's being condemned for what he is. You're a child made in the image of God. Oh, no, you're not. You're a faggot. And you can't join our church and you can't go to heaven. This is disgraceful, it's inhuman, it's obscene, and it comes from a clutch of hysterical, sinister virgins who've already betrayed their charge in the children of their own church. For shame, for shame.
God is very definitely beyond the verification process of science. God has been designed to be beyond the verification process of science. This is one of the classic adaptations of religions, is to create this gulf so that science can't get anywhere near God. That's true. But science can understand that very fact.
You say that
science can understand how religions evolved and why. By the way, that idea is completely absent in folk religions, which are the ancestors. The idea of God being, as it were, beyond science. They don't make a distinction between science and religion. In folk religions, it's all the same. It's all one. It's just what everybody knows. And they have no concept of faith. They don't need a concept of faith. It's only once you start getting this separation between science and other things that people think they know when maybe they don't, that's when the idea of faith looms and becomes a very attractive idea. And indeed it is. It protects the idea of God from disproof.
I disagree with that. The reason why I disagree with it, it would be more accurate, Ziba, if you said the scholars that you find attractive say that. But there are a bunch of scholars with a great number of following in Islam, all of them are self-appointed, by the way, because there's no hierarchy, there's no seminary of Islam, except a University of Al-Azhar, and we know the products of Al-Azhar. But there are scholars like Bin Laden who say we have to take
He's not a scholar by anyone's
He
measure.
has the greatest following. He has
That's
the
not
greatest
true.
following. The Islamic Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna, when you look at the Sunni Islam, when you look at Ayatollah Khomeini in the 20th century, the most influential guy of Shia Islam, another self-appointed scholar, you have all of it. Sheikh bin Baz, he has the greatest following. Sheikh al-Qaradawi, maybe these are individuals that are not attractive to you, but then it would be more accurate if you stated that. They are attractive to many Muslims, not thousands, but in the millions. And what they say, and that's why they're influential, is they challenge every single Muslim individual. Are you a true Muslim? If you are a true Muslim, you live by what the Quran dictates, you follow the example of the Prophet
Right,
Muhammad.
their interpretation,
and those
though.
scholars who insist on that are far more influential, far more powerful than your
Ayaan, you just quoted-
soft-spoken,
you just
wonderful, cuddly scholars.
Well, think about this. If life was designed, functional complexity of the cell is amazing. The eye is amazing. Look at it. Like if you saw a watch on the floor, how did it get there? It had to have a designer. Because your premise is that functional complexity cannot spontaneously, all by itself, come into existence. It had to be designed by, a watch is probably designed by a company and it has a history of trial and error and multiple designers, many of whom are dead, let's say. But in any event, you say, how did that get there? It had to be designed by something even more complex, more fascinating. Anything that is complex enough to define like a watch or a human being or an eyeball has to be at least as complex or more complex than it. If it is true, think about this. This is very important in my migration away from faith. If it is true that functional complexity requires a designer, then the mind of a God also requires a designer. Isn't the mind of a God beautiful? Doesn't it function? Isn't it complex? Doesn't he have desires? Doesn't he have plans? Isn't he this amazing big, is he just a big blob of random nothingness, or is he an amazingly organized genius of a beautiful, wise being up there? That complexity, by the argument of design, also would require a designer. If it doesn't, then throw away your argument. You're just believing by faith. The design argument either stands or it doesn't. So you can't invoke a designer to explain complexity who's more complex than the thing that it designed. That's circular reasoning. That's called begging the question. What you're doing is you're just explaining one mystery with another mystery.
What is the greatest misperception that exists in the public mind about atheism?
Oh, there's lots of them. I would say the greatest misconception about atheism is that we're not nice people. I think that a lot of people think that morality comes from religion. Religion teaches that morality comes from religion, and therefore if you don't have religion, you don't have morality. So I think the greatest misconception of atheism is that we're not nice and or immoral, which of course cannot be the case. It cannot be the case because all the data combats that. The population of people who are non-religious in this country, depending on your polls, goes somewhere between 15 and 30%. The population of atheists or non-religious people in federal prisons is 0.07%. 0.07 of 1%. So the amount of people, the amount of atheists who are committing crimes is tiny compared to the amount of atheists out there. On the other hand, if you look at it from a morality perspective, from an outside perspective, you can see what's happening. People change churches for a reason. They change churches because they don't agree with the church they're in. If they don't agree with the church they're in, so they say, okay, well, this church isn't doing something, it's not striking my moral fancy. I'm going to go to this church over here because it does. Well, that means morality is independent of religion. And then what they do is they go to this church over here that says, okay, your morality is correct, and God says so. And then they say, God gives me my morality, right? And it's kind of backwards, but that's how it works. The reality is that every single human picks their own morality. Morality is relative, and everybody picks it. Everybody chooses it. The only difference between an atheist and a theist is that an atheist will internalize it and say, this is my morality, and a theist will say, this is my morality because I get it from my religion.
It's an absurd situation we're in, where nothing that anyone does whilst being Muslim is any responsibility of Islam's. Yet anything anyone does whilst being a Christian or a Jew is responsibility of all Christians, all Jews. Let's make this as straightforward as I can. Take the categorization that eminent scholars like Bernard Lewis, Ibn Waraq have made. Let's say Islam is a very, very complex thing. And the best way I can do this in the very short time I have is say you have three Islams. Islam 1, 2, and 3. Islam 1, the Quran and the life of Muhammad and the Hadith. Islam 2, the tradition of the Sharia. Islam 3, what Muslims do now. The first of those things, Islam, the Quran, and so on, is bad. It is bad. There is a lot of violence in it. And what's worse, the peaceful verses are superseded by the violent verses. The violent verses also, sadly, are more numerous in number. Then you've got the life of Muhammad. Again, a bad man. A very bad man, it has to be said. Not a great role model, if you look at it. Takes child brides, abuses a small girl, multiple wives, himself a warrior, himself a war criminal, himself beheads Jews. This, I would have thought, would be a signal of not great peacefulness. Then you've got the tradition of the Sharia. Again, not great peacefulness. Still, no schools of Sharia that people in this hall would want to submit to. And thirdly, what Muslims do now, thankfully, there is some hope in that one. Because most Muslims, thank goodness, I almost said thank God, but old habits die hard. Most Muslims don't do what those texts say. Because they exercise their judgment as moral beings without having to refer to defunct holy books. Now look, I wish that Zebra and Majid were the spokespeople of Islam. It would be lovely, although in Majid's case it would have taken rather too long if everyone had to go for 14 years preaching the downfall of America and then said, no, not so much. But we are where we are. Anyhow, I wish they spoke for Islam. It would be great. But the fact is that tonight, the organisers of this debate asked a number of clerics. None of them would show. Specifically, they wouldn't show and debate against Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Myself, I don't think they cared. But But no, it's very interesting that they will not debate. Time and again, the actual leaders of your religion will not debate this, and you're left with people like we have here. The reason why is, of course, is that the leaders of the religion show such terrible lessons. It is not a small thing. It's not as it were a detail. It's not like a wacky Florida pastor that you've got the largest Sunni state of Saudi Arabia, the most important Sunni state in the world, the most extraordinary closed prison of a society. It's not a detail. It's not a one-off nut job. The Shiite Republic of Iran is what it is, led by the people it's led by. That is not an accident. It's not a detail. The thing that worries me is that although tonight we hear from the fellow panelists here about how Islam is a religion of peace, the fact is that the people who are making the decisions in the religion, the people who are preaching the religion, the heads of that religion, people like Sheikh Qaradawi, who broadcasts anti-Semitic, the most appalling filth every week on the main networks, that is the faith, the speaking for you guys. I wish that, Ziba, you were on every week on Al Jazeera, but you're not. Qaradawi is. The problem is that Islam is an unstable component, as a religion, an unstable component. 1,000 years ago, the Mu'tazilites tried to reform the religion. They were wiped out. The fact is that Islam is many things, many things. But to say it's a religion of peace is nonsense. It's to ignore reality. It's to ignore very difficult but necessary facts, not paradigms, but facts. To say that Islam is a religion of peace is to say something based entirely on hope. It's to elevate a hope into truth. And I hope, as you all know, history teaches us that's a very bad thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Clark.
It's a beautiful picture from the Hubble Space Telescope of a distant galaxy, far, far away and long, long ago. And there's a whole galaxy. It's about 1 billion light years away. We're looking at it as it looked 1 billion years ago. So many of those stars no longer exist. And here's an object that's just as bright as the whole center of the galaxy. You'd think it's a star that's near in our galaxy that just got caught in the picture frame. It's not. It's a star on the edge of that galaxy that has exploded. And exploding stars shine with a brightness of 10 billion stars. They're the brightest fireworks in the universe, supernovae. And they're remarkable, and I keep having asides. Maybe I'll get to my point eventually. But this is something that I wrote a whole book about, and someone asked me yesterday why I wrote that book. Because it is the most poetic thing I know about the universe. Richard wrote a great book called, what's it called? Our Ancestors? What's it called? Ancestor's Tale, yes. I want to make sure I got that right. And I wrote a book that was a different Ancestor's Tale. It's called Adam. But the amazing thing is that every atom in your body came from a star that exploded. And the atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand. It really is the most poetic thing I know about physics. You are all stardust. You couldn't be here if stars hadn't exploded, because the elements, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, iron, all the things that matter for evolution, weren't created at the beginning of time. They're created in the nuclear furnaces of stars, and the only way they can get into your body is if the stars were kind enough to explode. So forget Jesus. The stars died so that you could be here today. Okay? And anyway.
When we talk about does the Bible endorse slavery, he goes to a passage from Paul where he's talking to his Philemon, who was a runaway slave, saying, I want you to go back. And when you go back, tell your master, I don't want you to be a slave anymore. That type of thing. And he thinks that this is the Bible saying that slavery is wrong. And he says this while ignoring everything in Exodus 21 that expressly tells you who to enslave, how to enslave them, that they're worth 6 shekels, that you have to let Jews go after Jewish males go after 7 years. The women you get to keep. Have to go after 7 years unless you give them a wife and kids, and then you can trick them into being your slave forever. That it expressly says that these are your property that you can pass down, that you are to buy your slaves from the heathen around you. And somehow or another, none of that matters to Cliff, because Paul wanted his slave friend to not be a slave anymore. This is the way theists will think. There's a tap dance to make the Bible say whatever they need it to say. And when we had this debate at the Church of Christ and I brought up slavery, we went through this again. And I heard several different explanations from several different preachers. One of them said, well, this was the norm at the time, and God was implementing laws about slavery to soften slavery so that we would eventually realize that slavery was wrong and get rid of it. He's God. If he can tell you don't kill people and don't eat shrimp, certainly he can say don't own people as property. How hard was that? What kind of weak-ass tiny God do you believe in that he can't tell you to stop owning people? Well, he was actually trying to do the right thing, because all these heathen, this was the only way that they could come to the true understanding of God, was for the Jews to go over there and enslave them so that they could teach them about Yahweh. Well, once again, he's God. What's he doing picking the Jews not giving messages to anybody else anymore. I mean, I know that the Old Testament's a comedy of his failures where everything goes wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong until eventually he's just down to, okay, I'm going to take this one little family and I'm going to turn it into my preferred tribe, and it's still going to go wrong, by the way. Spoiler alert, everything goes wrong for God all the way through the book. And yet somehow he thinks it's a good idea. Hey, these other people here who are not my chosen people, but I'd really like them to believe in me, why don't we enslave them? And then we can teach them about me. Go on, Moses, go do that. This is the type of tap dancing that you get when you engage in people who cannot acknowledge that the Bible might be endorsing something that's immoral, that they might be believing in something that doesn't have good reason.
I'm going to start off with a thought experiment. Imagine you're a hominid on the plains of Africa 3.5 million years ago. You're a tiny little Australopithecine afarensis, little brain. Your name is Lucy. Thank you. A lot of people in the Midwest don't get that. Evolution? What? Not that Lucy, the other one. And you hear a rustle in the grass. Is it a dangerous predator, or is it just the wind? If you think that the rustle in the grass is a dangerous predator, and it turns out it's just the wind, you've made a type 1 error in cognition. You've a false positive. You thought the wind was connected to something and it wasn't. A was connected to B and it wasn't. So that's a false positive, but that's relatively harmless. But if you think that the rustle in the grass is just the wind and it turns out it's a dangerous predator, you're lunch. Congratulations, you've just been given a Darwin Award for taking yourself out of the gene pool early before reproducing. And we are the descendants of those who are most likely to make type 1 errors, false positives, versus type 2 errors, false negatives. That is to say, why can't you just stay in the grass and collect enough data to get the answer right? And the answer is that predators don't wait around for prey animals to collect more data. That's why they stalk and sneak up on their prey animals, so they can't get enough data. So we evolved the propensity to make snap decisions and make one kind of error more likely than another kind of error, and that kind of error, that false positive, that's superstition. That's magical thinking. That's assuming A is connected to B. It's a true pattern, and it isn't, and you're wrong. That's the basis of finding false patterns like God's. Now, what's the difference between the wind and a dangerous predator? The wind is an inanimate force. A dangerous predator is an intentional agent, and his intention is to eat me, and that can't be good. So what we also do, in addition to finding these meaningful patterns, is infuse in them agency. That is, it's alive, it's real, it has intention, and its intention is not good, so I better assume it's real. And this is the basis of animism and spiritism and polytheism and monotheism and the belief in angels and aliens and demons and spirits and poltergeists and gods. Gods are invisible agents who run the world, who control things, who create these patterns, who are these patterns that we use to explain things. All cultures everywhere in the world have created God beliefs. Gods with these intentional, that are intentional agents.
I don't want the religious person in the lab telling me that God is responsible for what it is they cannot discover. Because look at the hubris of that. You're in the lab and you say, I don't know how this works. And not only that, no one alive on earth knows how this works. And not only that, no one who will ever be born will know how this works. That's kind of audacious when you think about it. And then you put it down and go on to the next problem. This problem is a cure for Alzheimer's or cancer or whatever else. I don't want them in the science classroom. And so the issue is simply about progress and discovery. And in my recent forays into Washington, well, I've been closer to a community of Republicans than I've ever been in my life, because I grew up in New York City. And in New York City, I think that person is Republican back there. You see? No, not that one, the one behind that person. Yeah, that's a Republican. There's another one. That's in New York. So you grow up this way, and I get sort of baptized into a Republican administration. I had 2 consecutive appointments in the Bush administration, one on aerospace, on the aerospace industry, and one on space exploration, the NASA's future, basically. And I realized something, spending that much time in the community of powerful Republicans, that Republicans, above all else, do not want to die poor. So there's a limit to how far this will go. And I bet most people in this room, even those assembled at this table, were highly concerned about the Dover trial, wondering how that would turn. And I looked at that and I said, I'm not worried, because it's a Republican judge. And in the end, if you put people who are not making discoveries in the science classroom, that is the end of the foundation of your future economy. And so I had a little more confidence than others did because of this sensitivity to the money aspect of it. But we all know tomorrow's economies will be founded on innovations in science and technology, and of course that gets cut short if we lose our civilization, as what happened in Islam in 1100. And the last thought I'll leave you with, which concerns me greatly, if you do the math, okay, just look, you look at all the Nobel Prize winners there ever were, some even in this room, and ask how many were Muslim. And it's like one, maybe two, okay? I think a second one was in economics. And the one we referred to was described earlier, the co-winner of the Nobel Prize with Professor Weinberg, Abdus Salam. And he's not Middle Eastern Muslim, he's Pakistani Muslim. Okay? Now, how many Nobel Prizes are won by Jews? It's like a fourth of the Nobel Prizes. Okay? Some high fraction of the total. And then you look, how many Muslims are there in the world? It's like 1 billion Muslims. How many Jews? 15 million tops. Okay? So you could ratio these numbers had Islam not collapsed in its intellectual standing in the year 1100, and you just do the ratios, they would have every single Nobel Prize today. So the fact that it's not only just a few, it's near zero, is deeply worrying. I'm concerned about what brilliance may have expressed itself and did not in that community over the past 1,000 years.
My attitude to science is that we are fundamentally trying to understand how things work. Science is very difficult. It's very difficult to understand how things work. The hard problem of consciousness has been mentioned, the problem of the origin of the universe, the problem of the origin of life, the problem of how life has this uncanny appearance of being designed, the size of the universe, the scale of the universe, how embryology works. These are all deeply difficult questions. They require hard scientific work. And in all cases, I think I'm right in saying that scientific work consists of explaining complicated things in terms of the interactions of their parts or of simpler things. So we always try to explain complex things in terms of simpler things. We do not resort to magical language. We do not snow our audience with highfalutin sounding words that don't actually mean anything. We use words that actually have meaning. We use expressions that can be tested. We work hard at understanding the universe in terms of its component parts. We don't invent superarching entities which have no explanation in themselves. We don't invoke ideas like the universe has consciousness, the universe has awareness, atoms have awareness. If we have a difficult problem like awareness, we explain it in terms of the interactions between small parts working together in ways that scientists understand. If Freeman Dyson ever said atoms are aware, then he's wrong. I don't think he said it. I think he should sue you.
Wow. I think you put enough on the table. Okay, none of those are scientific evidence. Many of those claims trespass upon the territory of science overtly. I mean, the claim about your understanding other human beings being suggestive of a divine artificer. Is that a scientific claim? Absolutely. I mean, is your understanding of mathematics also suggestive of a divine artificer? No, it has to do with my experience. Your ability to learn language, do you understand? It has to do with my experience of you. When I'm looking at you right now, you may assume that what I see is a material, but that's not what I see. And it's not what I believe. And I think I understand it's not what you believe. There's something in you that is more than you believe. I really think so. This is now, if you want to make that a scientific claim, you can. But I'm telling you, it's a metaphysical claim, and to confuse the two is a mistake. Okay, you can add any metaphysics you want. Thank you. In that, by that means, I mean, I can say, I see you as a reincarnate personality, and I think you were probably on Atlantis. Yes. Don't make me like a washerwoman. People do this all the time. I mean, you can broadcast. I mean, this is constrained by our common sense in every other domain of discourse. We just take, for example, the people who think Elvis is still alive. Okay, what's wrong with this claim? I mean, why is this claim not vitiating our academic departments and corporations? I mean, I'll tell you why, and it's very simple. We have not passed laws against believing Elvis is still alive. The problem is that whenever somebody seriously represents his belief that Elvis is still alive in a conversation, on a first date, at a lecture, at a job interview, he immediately pays a price. He pays a price in ill-concealed laughter. Right. Now, surely you can agree with that. That is a good thing. Now, then he could rattle on about this is not a scientific claim. This is a matter of faith. When I look at you, I see you might be Elvis. I mean, he could do this.
I think that using the word God or the attitude of faith toward that which you don't know is a cop-out. It's a way of slapping a label onto something rather than trying to understand it. Or since we may not understand everything, just say there's some things we don't understand. To invent stories that sound as if they were true or could be true, to pretend that they're true just so that we can have a story, I think is unsatisfying, and it could even be immoral because it could lead you to mistaken policies, to getting in the way of your best understanding of how the world works, to doing things that lead to more harm than good. I mean, the concrete example would be treating cancer with some cockamamie herbal or homeopathic formula instead of the best medicine that we have, or justifying invasions and murders and sacrifices on the grounds of appeasing some god or carrying out some divine mandate. I think there's nothing but mischief that can come from inventing stories for that which we don't understand. There's nothing wrong with saying there's some things we don't understand.